you can enable your jib to do more. Hi, I'm Bruce Philpott. I'd like to show you some of the inventions that I've made and some of the ideas that I've thought up that help me enjoy my jib booms for video. So here's what we're going to cover in this video to help you get more out of your jib boom. We're going to talk about planning your shots, whether you're using a large jib or small jib, about choosing a jib stand, about how to set up your jib efficiently, finding out how much counterweight you need, operating your camera from the front, the middle, or the counterweight end, putting your jib on a dolly and a track, building a remotely operated fluid head, making a remotely wired follow focus, and the types of shots you can get from your now newly improved jib. Any camera movement has to be planned in advance. You've probably seen those shots where the jib rises up out of the shrubbery for no reason at all, and that does not contribute to the story. What I recommend is this book by Nicholas T. Perforas, Film Directing Fundamentals. See your film before shooting. In it, there are tons of illustrations and examples from films that you've seen, and even a short screenplay that he wrote himself, showing where he positions his cameras and why. So I recommend that you get this. I got my copy from the public library, got halfway through, and had to buy one from Amazon. So I encourage you to get that. Before we start to talking about jib operation, I'd like to talk about jib stands. I see a lot of people, in fact, I at first, when I started out using a jib, I mounted it on a tripod. And I foolishly mounted mine on my tripod head. Now understand, looking up the specs, the tripod head doesn't have nearly the load-bearing ability as your tripod legs do. So if the jib that you buy or make can stand on just the legs themselves without the tripod head, you've got a stronger stand. One that I found on eBay is this one right here. It's also considered a speaker stand. Very lightweight aluminum, very compact. This goes down, the top flips over, so it's got different diameters on the top. I put either my 6-foot jib or my 10-foot jib on this, and it works very well. I like the broad stance of it too, because jibs are inherently wanting to tip over because they're so heavy. I like the stability of this one. Something I'd like to mention that's important about your jib is that when you're setting it up, when you're first setting it up, you want it to be straight up and down. One easy way that I found to assure that is with a little bullseye level like this. I just put it on here. We can see the stand isn't exactly level or plumb, so we'll grab a piece of plywood, put it under this leg, and that's close enough. Now we know that the stand is level enough to mount the jib stand on. When I first got this 6-foot jib, it was a pain to put together. In fact, it was kind of a comedy to watch me because I was my own worst enemy. With the 6-foot jib, at least I didn't have to bend over too far to mount the camera. With the 10-foot jib, I found I was sitting on the ground or down on my hands and knees to mount the camera and the monitor. The difficulty came when it was time to install the counterweights. I had to reach way up in the air and try to bring down that end of the boom. Of course, it was even worse with the 10-foot jib. When I did manage to get some counterweights on, I didn't know if I had enough counterweight on until I had too much, so then I had to take some off. So it was just a matter of trial and error until I got the right amount of counterweight. I do all that differently now. Take a look. When I mount the jib, it's just as before, but I got an idea. So I bent this piece of aluminum and I screwed it on to a Manfrotto quick release, and it will fit on any of the tripods that I have. I can just set up a tripod quickly and mount the quick release onto it with this little thing that I call a yoke, for want of a better term. And this supports the camera at whatever height is appropriate, kind of like that. So now I have the tripod head at a decent height. I can mount the camera at a comfortable height. And I mount my monitor. And now, take a look down at this end. I always had kind of a problem figuring out how much counterweight do I need. So, got myself one of these little portable luggage scales. I just strap this on and pull down and hold it until the camera floats. Wait for a moment until it registers, and then I can see that I need 25.2 pounds of counterweight. It's that easy. That looks pretty good. When I want to make a micro adjustment on it, I use a C-clamp, and depending upon how far along the C-clamp is, it's like a micro adjustment. It's like the old doctor scales used to be, where they'd slide it back and forth. But this looks like it's working perfectly. It's ready to use. Now, I don't have my monitor wired up yet. It's just a demonstration. But I like to operate my camera from this end. I see a lot of people operating their jib down there. If they have a viewfinder all the way down at the weight end, I feel I have a lot more control here. Certainly I can pan and tilt. Loosen this up. So I can pan and tilt as desired. I'm going to get it better balanced. And I can zoom in and follow focus. It's wonderful, but I am confined to this arc. I can go up and I can come down, and I can pivot back and forth, and I can change my focal length, but I'm stuck in this arc. So that brings up the subject of putting your jib on a dolly. Now, I want to warn you that that's about the most dangerous thing you can do with your equipment, is to put it on a dolly, because as I mentioned, it's already very top heavy with your weights and with your camera, with your monitor and so on. So think twice before you put it on a dolly. I have some wonderful little Ravelli dollies that I put under my tripod, and I put those on some of the track that I'm going to show you shortly, and it's wonderful. It's just terrific. But it's narrow. It doesn't even have the same spread that a normal tripod would have, and we've got a whole lot of leverage going back and forth here. So I want to make sure that you understand that you want to have as steady, stable a dolly setup as you can. I'll show you what I've put together. I built this dolly out of plywood, and rather than take up the entire next half of the video showing you how I built it, I've put together a PDF for you, which you can find online, and here's the URL. It shows you how I built my dolly and how I built the track that I'm about to demonstrate for you. So I tried to make it as simple as possible, since I'd be the one operating it. All I have to do is slide this piece into that piece. How hard is that? So now it's nice and stable, it's locked in. So I have these little bolts that I put on strings so I wouldn't lose them. Put one through here, one through here. I originally had wing nuts. I found I don't need them. So now we need some track to put it on. The track that I use is simple 3/4 inch Schedule 40 PVC, like probably a lot of you are using. But using that dolly, the dolly is 4.5 feet long. I put it on a 10-foot track. That gives me 5.5 feet of movement. That's not very much. So what I've done is added extensions to it. And I have extensions of various lengths. And on the PDF, it'll show you how to do these extensions. They go in almost seamlessly. And I show you where I have different lengths of PVC. I have you cut the second 10-foot lengths of PVC into 3 sections, and that gives you an infinite number of possibilities within about 17-inch increments. It works out pretty nicely for me. I have, again, it's in the PDF, I have these little connectors that go through these little holes, 1/8 inch holes I've drilled. I've attached this one. And this one. In the PDF, it shows how the stand, my particular stand, mounts on this particular dolly. I built those little stirrups, you see, and it's all, again, explained in the PDF. But this is not going anywhere, any more likely than the dolly is likely to come off the track. So this not only permits me now to swing in that arc, but I can go straight forward and straight back, or any place within the reach of that boom. So this gives me a lot more latitude. Also in the PDF, it explains how I prevent running off the end of the track, which I thought would be a problem. I've got that solved too, so I encourage you to read the PDF. I found a bargain on this used 10-foot jib. I could operate it from this end, the way I do with the 6-foot jib. But then I'd lose the best feature of this larger jib, its 7-foot reach. Of course, when I want to enjoy this reach, I have to operate the camera from here at the stand, or down there at the counterweights. With relatively small jibs like this, I don't find an advantage to operate the camera from way down there. So I work from here at the stand. I can swing the camera out over an audience, for instance, or over a car or furniture or shrubbery. The problem I immediately ran into, though, is that I can't pan the camera on the fluid head out there. I would have to swivel the whole jib around to point the camera in the direction I want to, or I could point the camera up and down, but only when it's aligned with the jib. I can pull it up and down using this lever over here, but then the camera has to be aligned with the jib. It can't pivot back and forth. We've all seen those amazing motorized heads at the ends of long jibs. I saw a motorized head on the end of an 18-foot jib. It was only $1,500, which is a lot less than most jibs with motorized heads. I don't know how well built the bargain head was, but I certainly can't afford $1,500 for that setup. Instead, I've made kind of a marionette, a 10-foot puppet. I've installed these aluminum levers. This one pitches the camera up and down, and this one turns the camera left and right. Quite a wide range. For clarity, let me show it to you this way. The top of this lever is attached to a steel cable that wraps around a spool I'll tell you about later, and it's hose clamped around the fluid head. The cable continues back to attach to the bottom of the lever. I have small bungee cords at each end to let me take up any slack. When the lever is pulled this way, the cable turns the fluid head, turning the camera right. When the lever is turned this way, the camera is pulled to the left. Similarly, this lever, also attached to a steel cable, tilts the camera down or up, regardless of where the fluid head is panned, and regardless of whether the jib is high or low or where it swings. Notice that I've hung the camera upside down. Originally, it was mounted here on the standard camera platform, but I found that when I turned the camera right, the lens would bump into the jib arm. So I hung the camera upside down. You can either hang your monitor upside down, or with most monitors, you can just tell it to flip 180 so you'll be able to see it. Originally I had the camera balanced level, so if I let go of the control lever, so that it would just sit level. But that meant that I had to have a large aluminum bracket that came down here so that I could pull it downward. So the way I've set it up now, you can see from way back here is where it's balanced, and it wants to point down like this. Now come down here with this to this end, and you'll see that I've added some bungee cords here, and that's what keeps it at a level. When I first tried to steer the head left and right, I just attached a cable with a hose clamp, and I found that the hose clamp would slip off because, as you see, this is tapered. I had to grind this part down with a grinder so that it became a cylinder. Then, once I had a cylinder, I need to figure out some kind of spool that would wrap around the head tightly. The solution I came up with was this piece of aluminum channel, wide enough to accommodate the hose clamp. Using my jigsaw, I made cuts in the sides of the channel, but not through the bottom of the U. I made cuts every 1/4 inch. Those cuts enabled me to bend the channel into a circle that wraps around the fluid head. I wrapped my steering cable around that spool 1.5 times, securing it with the hose clamp. I put a couple of eye bolts on a bracket over here for the cables, so that regardless of where the cables and the control lever is, they're going straight onto the spool. That way they're not coming onto the spool at an angle. I know what you're thinking. How do you focus the camera when it's way out there? I made a simple wired follow focus. I started by removing the manual follow focus from my rails. I ordered online from Hobby King and got this little servo. That may have been just a bad sample. So instead of that, I went to my local hobby shop and I got a servo that looks just about the same. Instead of being maybe $10 for that one, this one was $89, and that's pretty steep for me, but for a follow focus it wasn't bad. And I put this 72 tooth 32 pitch gear on it, and I cut some aluminum plate so that the servo would fit into it, and drilled holes so that I could attach the servo to it. And I drilled and tapped a little 1/4 hole so that it can attach quickly. So all I have to do with this, adjust this so that it lines up, so the gears line up precisely. This is a servo tester that I bought from Hobby King. We can plug it in here. Little power supply that I bought from Hobby King. I put Velcro on the back so that I can just attach them wherever I want to. They're both pretty light. And here comes the exciting part, drum roll. And you can see, as I turn, it's proportionate to how much I turn. So I can focus very easily. I just extended this cord. I soldered some more cord on, and I still have another quick disconnect. And I like this so much that I took I figured, well, $89 isn't bad for a follow focus. What if my jib is my camera's way out there on a jib, say over an audience or over someplace, and I decide there are other cameras on the scene, but I want this camera to change focal length. I don't like to zoom while I'm filming, but I do like to change focal lengths and not have to run out to the camera to do so. So I put another lens ring on. This time I put it on the zoom ring, and this is what causes it to change focal lengths. So we can reattach our follow focus, our motorized follow focus, and attach another servo, another $89 servo, but it certainly beats the cheapest follow focus, wired follow focus that I could find was $400. With a kind of another kind of Rube Goldberg thing. I like simple stuff, as you may have noticed. I take this bungee cord and attach it over here somewhere. So as you can see, we can now change focal length with that knob. And if we're still lined up on the other knob, the other gear, there we are, we can change focus with one and change focal length with the other. These servos don't have quite as much rotation as the maximum rotation of the lens rings. but that hasn't gotten in my way. I just decide in advance which end of the range I need, and set the gears for that range. Say I know that this shot's going to require the lens to focus as close as possible. I'll set it up with that minimum focus. For another shot, I might need to focus on infinity. I'll set it up so that the closest focus is, say, 7 feet, and that way permits me to reach infinity on the long end. This jib, like everything else in my life, is a work in progress. Up until now, I've mounted these servo testers here on the steering levers. But I realize now that I'll be better off with 3 people. A dolly grip to operate the dolly and jib, a camera operator to move the camera on the fluid head, and a first assistant camera operator to pull focus. The focus puller can either hand hold a second monitor, or it can mount on a wheeled stand like this. That electronic viewfinder that I use has an HDMI out port, and I can just run a cable from that to this monitor, and the focus puller can have the servo tester mounted right here. Even if you don't build a remote wired follow focus, even before you rig cables to steer your fluid head, you can turn your camera sideways on a jib if it's on a dolly. Here's the dolly and stand on the track. Here's the dolly grip, and here's the 10-foot jib and the camera operator. With the jib sideways, you can lead your subjects as they walk and talk. Since their distance from the camera doesn't change, you don't have to follow focus. You can lower or raise the jib as they go down or upstairs, or even lead them around a corner. Hey, why not mount a second pre-focus camera on that dolly jib for that walk and talk? Your subjects can even go over obstacles where a Steadicam operator wouldn't be able to lead them. If your subjects are talking while jogging, you can even mount your jib on a pickup truck. A fully enabled jib can move in an arc above a table and a reverse arc around a subject, and then come back down and recede down the table between the people seated there. If you're interested, you can look at or download a very detailed picture of my jib here. These do-it-yourself jib modifications can be done one part at a time, as you find the need for them. The servos I bought were under $100. The other modifications can each be done for far less than $100. That's far less than the off-the-shelf modifications you'll find. When you've enabled your jib so you can operate the fluid head remotely and the focus remotely, just think of the possible angles you'll be able to get and the action you'll be able to follow from any angle. Now, the only limits are your imagination. Yes, there are many situations where a Steadicam, say, or a slider will work better to get the shots that you want. But for me, an enabled jib is a wonderful, frugal piece of camera moving equipment. I'd like you to think of these ideas that I've shown you as seeds of creativity. When they've germinated in your brain, please share the ideas that have sprouted for you. I'll see you next time.